Welcome to CC Writes. My name is CC Lucky, and today I am facing my criticism head on. Facing criticism is hard. Facing criticism when you're as sensitive as most writers are is especially hard. For me, criticism, even with the best of intentions, can be a roadblock to my mental health. That's why I have to be really careful about when and how I face it, as opposed to facing it like, never. Even when you're a complete gooey mess of insecurity like myself, it's still possible to take other people's criticism without having a complete mental breakdown. It's still possible to hear the things that you did wrong and learn from it without getting angry, defensive, or depressed. Today, I'm going to show you the 3 steps that I use to accept the criticism of my writing with grace. What prompted this exercise in taking criticism is actually a comment that somebody left on my video about my attempts to write a story like Dan Harmon. The comment started off with, "I hope you can respect this criticism," so I knew to immediately put it down and not read it any further. I set it aside to look at later and I moved on with my day. And now future CC is here to deal with the consequences of that decision. Thanks a lot, past CC. Unfortunately, I'm not in a position where I can ignore criticism entirely, as much as I'd love to, as much as I would really love to. As writers, we have to get feedback on our work so that we can improve. We take feedback from editors, agents, publishers, and our audience. It is an unavoidable part of this life. Completely unavoidable. But just because we have to accept criticism doesn't mean that we have to accept it on other people's terms. We get to decide when it's time to receive criticism, when we respond to it, and how we respond to it. First, you should figure out something really important about yourself. When is the best time for you to think about critical comments? When I got the comment on my video, it was on a day when a family member had just passed away, and I had just found out that a friend of mine had lost a child, even though they had been desperately yearning for children for years. I was a mess. I wasn't in the right mental space to accept any form of criticism. I'd already been crying for 2 days for completely unrelated reasons, so all of this personal tragedy on top of my regularly scheduled depression was just too much. You should always consider where you are mentally before you decide to receive comments on your work. Even in normal circumstances, when somebody leverages criticism towards my work, I need at least 24 hours before I'm mentally prepared to face it. When I worked as a grant writer, we had to regularly submit our work for feedback. Despite the fact that I knew my boss would typically not have anything negative to say about my work, I still needed to wait a full day before I was ready to read his feedback, because I'm a dirty coward. So you should figure out your own timeline and find ways to give yourself the space to receive criticism safely. Receiving criticism is one thing, but reacting to it is another task entirely. Humans have a bad habit of reacting aggressively or violently to things that we view as a threat. Criticism, at its core, is a threat to our pride and our sense of self. That's why the first thing you should do after you've received criticism is nothing. Do absolutely nothing. Don't respond at all for at least a day or 2 or 3 or however long it takes for you to calm the crap down. Knee-jerk reactions are the worst kind of reactions. You will embarrass yourself. You will make yourself look bad. Worst of all, you might end up hurting someone who genuinely likes you and wants what's best for you. So don't act. Give yourself time to feel your feelings. Give yourself time to process. And once the anger and hurt have faded to tolerable levels, you can make a clear and logical decision about what to do with it. My clear and logical decision was to turn somebody's critique into a learning moment for other writers. We know when to accept criticism, we know when to respond to it, and so now I want to go over how we respond to criticism. I already mentioned that anger is not the correct response. If you start trying to respond to criticism and notice yourself getting angry, it's time to stop and take a deep breath. Recenter yourself and start over. If you cannot possibly respond without anger, then don't respond at all, especially not in a public situation like on the internet. Even if you feel that your anger is fair and justified, it's still better to just let it go. And when I say let it go, I mean let it go like an ice princess in a Pixar movie. If someone's criticism only elicits a response of anger from you, then they obviously didn't provide enough information to make their comment helpful. And if it isn't helpful, it isn't worth your time. You don't need to think about it. You don't need to change because of it. The most important part about responding to criticism is knowing whether or not somebody's criticism can help you improve. Even the most tactless criticism might contain a kernel of truth that you can use to make your writing better. So it's really important to learn the difference between hurtful criticism that might actually help and worthless criticism that's only meant to drag you down. There are the more obvious types of worthless criticism. You suck. You don't even know what you're talking about. Why would anyone listen to somebody as ugly as you? This kind of criticism can go straight into the garbage with the trash people who would make that kind of comment. It's not worth your time or energy, so just skim right past those comments, which I understand is easier said than done. Just keep in mind that you are worth more than people like that will ever be. Then there are the more subtle types of worthless criticism. Sometimes it can be couched inside of nice comments. They'll say things like, I liked this, but it was too short. Or they might be mean about it. Your story didn't make any sense. Your story wasn't any good. I just didn't like it. The reason why comments like this are worthless is because they don't offer anything that you can use to change or improve your writing. They also don't provide any specifics as to what was wrong with it. They just give a general term of this is bad because I said so. Worthless criticism doesn't require any kind of response from you. You don't have to say anything to these people. You don't have to politely thank them for their advice with a strained smile on your face like you're currently at the doctor's office getting a very uncomfortable prostate exam. Just set it aside and don't address it at all. Worthwhile criticism will always come with a specific example of what was wrong, or it will include advice on how you might make things better. When you get this kind of criticism, thank your lucky stars because this might actually be useful. And when I say might, I really do mean might. Because bless their pretty little hearts, not all people who are capable of making worthwhile criticism actually know what they're talking about. It might be difficult to discern this group, but as you read through what they have to say, you might pick up on a few key traits that mark them as somebody not to listen to. First, they didn't read the whole thing. Second, they don't usually read the genre of your story. Third, the things they're criticizing make absolutely no sense in context of your story. Fourth, their spelling and grammar is so bad that their comment is nearly unreadable. Fifth, their suggestions would undermine the intent of your story. The list goes on, but over time you will start to notice which comments are more helpful and which ones are made from people who don't really understand what's going on. You can respond to these pieces of criticism or not, depending on how you feel at the time. I typically don't respond to any criticism that doesn't help my work improve. And that just leaves the quality criticism that is both worthwhile and helpful. If the person who gave you the criticism is generally tactless, you can ignore most of what they say and only focus in on the things that can help your work improve. Typically, unless the criticism is from an agent, editor, or publisher, I won't engage much unless I have a specific question that can help me clarify things. Questions about quality criticism are always acceptable. If you need to know more about why somebody thinks that you should change something, or delve deeper into the changes that they suggest, then ask away. Otherwise, I feel it's best to just keep things short and simple. The best way to respond to criticism is to change for the better. Whatever you might comment, whatever argument you might make to defend your work isn't worth it. Accept the criticism that you can, make the appropriate changes if they're needed, and ignore everything else. That's how you face criticism with grace. And now for the hard part. I still haven't read or addressed the comment on my video. And I wouldn't be a very good teacher if I didn't give you a solid example of how it should be done. So here goes. So their comment. I hope you can respect this criticism. You're plotting the story unlike Dan Harmon. Take your premise, for example. You have a ghost who wants to be accepted by people. I think you need to plot out the story so that by being accepted by people, he pays a heavy price. In this story, admitting what he is doesn't actually make him pay that heavy of a price, and he's immediately forgiven for his actions. I think it could be improved by having the heavy price be accepting that he cannot have a normal life. He can't be seen by everyone. That's his burden to pay, but by accepting it, he can then go on to live a normal life for his circumstances. Oh, thank God it was not bad criticism. I was so worried. All right, so here's what I'm gonna do with this. First, I'm going to address the first part. You're plotting this story unlike Dan Harmon. I'm going to throw that sentence in the trash because I don't need it. In the rest of the comment, they don't clearly explain why I didn't plot it like Dan Harmon. They just point out how I tried to plot it like Dan Harmon and I did a bad job at it, which is fair. That second sentence is actually more hurtful than anything else. They could have meant it as a simple transition into the point that they were trying to make, but if you get rid of the first two sentences in this comment, then the rest of the criticism actually reads really pleasantly. So let's delete those first two lines, maybe even the first half of the third sentence for the sake of clarity, and move on. I think you need to plot out the story so that being accepted by people, he pays a heavy price. They didn't see his acceptance of his death as paying a heavy price. The linchpin of this assessment is their understanding of my main character's greatest need. They think he wants to be accepted by people. My point in writing it isn't that he wanted to be accepted. It was that he wants to be alive. But the disconnect between my intentions and this person's interpretation is very telling. It tells me that I wasn't successful at conveying a very important part of my character's motivation. The rest of the commenter's advice is perfectly reasonable for their interpretation. It would still make a great story, but it wouldn't make the story I wanted to write, which means I don't necessarily need to follow that advice. What I can do is try to revisit my main character's motivation and make it more clear what he actually wants. The commenter also suggested that my main character's acceptance of his own death isn't a heavy enough price to pay. That also means that the stakes weren't high enough in my story as it is. This is something I can take under advisement and try to rework to make the story have more weight to it. I appreciate that quite a lot, and it's definitely going to help me improve my story. These changes may not be exactly what my critic was looking for, but they are changes that I feel comfortable with and that reflect my story as I intend it to be written. My comfort and the integrity of my story supersedes all other opinions about it, and that is fact. So here's how I'm going to respond, because this person actually provided me with two very helpful ways that I can improve. Thank you for your advice. It was very helpful and I really appreciate your opinion. I'll definitely be able to make a better story in the future with your insight. And heart the comment. And that's it. They helped me, so I thanked them. I'm actually really grateful that this was a good critique. I got a lot out of it and I can improve this story and future stories using their advice. They clearly knew what they were talking about, even if what I got out of it wasn't exactly what they intended. Not all critiques are going to be this nice. You may have to dig through a lot of trash before you find gems like this. So make sure that you protect your feelings and do what you have to do to keep things on your own terms. Your mental health will thank you later. Thank you so much for coming to hang out with me today while I face down my arch nemesis, criticism. I hope you enjoyed our time together, and if you want to check out my failed attempt to plot a story like Dan Harmon, click on the top video. Otherwise, click on the bottom video and see what YouTube recommends. As always, thank you for joining me today on CC Writes, and I will